Okay, so I think we are about ready to get started. Welcome everybody to this year's Gideon Klein presentations and actually the launch of the 2021 Holocaust and Genocide Awareness Week at Northeastern University. I just wanted to tell you a little bit about the long and storied tradition of Holocaust awareness and Holocaust commemoration here at Northeastern University. The Holocaust Awareness Committee was founded in 1977 at this university and has since organized a Holocaust Awareness Week, later renamed Holocaust and Genocide Awareness Week, with programming that has involved both commemoration and education and public activities. Over the years, the activities of the Holocaust Awareness Committee and Holocaust and Genocide Awareness Committee have evolved and have taken on a form of a series of endowed events, of which this is the first one for our Holocaust and Genocide Awareness Week. There is a presentation of the Gideon Klein Award and the Gideon Klein Scholar, which I'll tell you about in a minute. There is the Morton Lecture, the annual Morton Lecture, which this year we are having Professor David Nierenberg, the Dean of the Divinity School at the University of Chicago, and one of the leading experts on Jewish, Christian, and Muslim relations, talk to us about what the past of anti-Semitism can tell us about its potential future. And that is on Wednesday at 7 o'clock. And there's a Morton lecture each year. And annually, we also have a Holocaust survivor lecture. This is, which will be held on, it's called the Philip Backstrom Survivor Series, which will be held this year on Thursday at 12 o'clock. And we will be having Esther Adler join us. So this is the first event that begins our week of commemoration and study and public learning about the Holocaust at Northeastern University. And like I said, it's part of a long tradition. This is the Gideon Klein Award presentation, which this year called Music in the Holocaust, Making Music in the Holocaust. And the Gideon Klein Award was established by Professor Bill Geeson in 1997 to honor the memory of his mother, Gerald Corman Geeson. And Professor Geeson chose to name this endowed scholarship after Gideon Klein, who was a musician and composer and pianist who both made music in the Holocaust and was a victim of it and murdered in the Holocaust. And since 1997, this endowment has supported an annual student project that is either a performance or an original work of art or a piece of scholarship investigating the theme of music in the Holocaust. And since that time, the results have been extremely impressive, and they are all on both the Holocaust and Genocide Awareness Committee's archives, website of their archives, as well as the Jewish Studies programs website, where you can watch previous presentations and see these projects and really how impressive they have been. This year, we are really thrilled to be honoring and also learning from our student Kalah Karloff and her incredible presentation, which is coming right up, as well as Professor Joshua Jacobson, who was for decades a pillar of the Jewish Studies program at Northeastern University, as well as the center of the study of and performance of Jewish music at the university. So to introduce Kalah, I have Professor Lori Lefkowitz, who is Ruderman Professor of Jewish Studies, Director of the Jewish Studies Program and Director of the Humanities Center of Northeastern. And just before I do so, I want to say thanks to all the people who have put their heart and soul and time and logistics into making this slightly different event this year possible, although it's actually our second Gideon Klein virtual presentation because last year's 2020s had to be postponed and be given virtually in the fall. So it's actually our second virtual presentation of the Gideon Klein Award and our showcase. And I have no doubt that this one will go as stupendously as the first one. But to make that possible, I just want to say thanks to Deborah Levison, Gabby Fiorenza for the logistical work in making it possible, as well as the support of the Dean's office and the Provost's office, especially Dean Uta Poiger. And really to thank the committee. I should have introduced myself off the bat, but my name is Ivan Rabinovich, and I teach in the history department and the program in Jewish studies. And I'm also chair of the Holocaust and Genocide Awareness Committee. But it is a committee of students, staff, and faculty to program these events and to support events around campus commemorating Holocaust and genocide. And I thank all the committee members for their work in having done so. But I'm going to hand it off now to Professor Lefkowitz, who's going to introduce Kalah Karloff.
Thank you, Professor Rabinovich, and welcome to everyone to this evening's presentations, most especially to my beloved colleague, Josh Jacobson, who has himself mentored many Gideon Klein scholars. As Professor Rabinovich has indicated, Northeastern University Gideon Klein scholars reliably produce creative and original research. I have noticed some of you in the audience this evening and very glad to see you here. It has been a special privilege to work with this year's Gideon Klein scholar, Kalah Karloff, to learn from her and to watch her project on the uses of music by the Nazis in the Holocaust develop. Kalah Karloff graduated this fall from Northeastern University with a Bachelor of Science in Communications, Music Industry, and Media Production. During her time at Northeastern, Kalah was involved in film and television production, songwriting, and musical theater. She graduated a passionate and ambitious media producer and songwriter with a career goal of becoming a producer and writer in the television and entertainment industries. Kalah is now working toward achieving that dream in her new role as a production coordinator at Ralph, a creative agency based in New York City. In our time of pandemic, alas, Kalah is living at home in Massachusetts with her family and 2 Pomeranians. Kalah is a music lover, so of course she looks forward to going back to concerts. And in the meantime, she told me that she is playing guitar, creating TikToks, watching Marvel and Star Wars movies, and baking things like the rest of us that she's seen on the Food Network. Kalah's project taught me a lot about how the experience of music is context dependent, and that even our greatest pleasures can be transformed into instruments of torment. Turning the spotlight to Kalah Karloff, I want first to congratulate you, Kalah, for the achievements of your graduation from Northeastern and for the Gideon Klein Award that you have used so productively. Kalah.
Hello and welcome. As you know, I'm Kalah, and I welcome you to tonight's Music in the Holocaust Gideon Klein presentations. Thank you to Professor Rabinovich and Professor Lefkowitz for the kind introductions. It has been such an honor to be named the Gideon Klein Scholar of this year, and I have so much enjoyed working on this project for the past year or so. I would like to take a minute to thank everyone who supported me during this project: Professor Lefkowitz, Professor Inglese, my parents, my family, my friends, Northeastern Jewish Studies Department, and Northeastern CAMD. I would also just like to say welcome to my family and friends for being here tonight. I'm so excited to have you and to finally share what I'm sure you have been hearing so much about from me. Again, it is an honor to be this year's Gideon Klein Scholar. And with that, I will introduce my presentation. We made music in hell, music and the Holocaust. I would like to start off with a listening exercise. You don't have to think too much about this, just listen.
Wir schreiten fest in leichem Schritt, wir trotzen Not und Sorgen, denn in uns zieht die Hoffnung mit auf Freiheit und das Morgen. Schenk Roten ein, schenk Weißen ein, so will ich das Lied euch singen.
Wartet uns kein Königswesen, kein Gott, kein Kaiser und noch Tribun.
Weil ich dich liebe, glaub ich an dich, doch willst das Schicksal, vergisst du mich, das darf nicht sein, tausendmal nein. Komm zurück.
What my first slide shows is an introduction to music as an instrument of torture. To talk about music as torture is not how we usually think about music, and I'm sure upon hearing this, some of you felt surprised. Music is encouraging and uplifting, but this presentation is how we address the surprise that music could be used as a form of violence. As old as Greek myths, there have been examples of music being used to torment. The myth of Apollo and his satyr tells of Apollo condemning his satyr due to the outcome of their flute contest. Apollo was upset that he lost. Then moving on to the Atlantic slave trade. Slave owners forced slaves to dance as a form of entertainment and power. Moving on to a bit more of a modern example, in US detention centers in Cuba and Afghanistan, detainees reported being exposed to relentless music by guards. And now moving on to the Holocaust, which is the center of my presentation today, and how music's pervasive and detrimental role in concentration camps affected the prisoners there. Before moving into my project, I would like to also introduce an anecdote about Coco Schumann. Coco was a German jazz musician and Holocaust survivor. He explained in an interview that he made music in hell. Coco was a member of a jazz band organized in Theresienstadt. He also played music in Auschwitz for inmates and guards. Coco played for his life amid violence and emotional turmoil, and he was far from being the only victim of musical torture in concentration camps. My thesis states that although music is usually identified as a positive power, music can and has been used as a form of torture to affect the human body and emotion. In my presentation, I explore how Nazis used music as a form of torture in concentration camps by discussing the different methods of sonic torture that were utilized: forced singing, music from radio, and camp orchestras. Resultantly, I conclude that music has the power to drive different emotional experiences and is fundamentally dependent on the context in which it is being played or performed. The first big concept we have to understand here is the interdependent nature between music and human emotion. Music is fundamental to human experience, and it helps elicit emotions. Music moves and shapes the human body and is an important medium for processing experiences, emotions, and helping form identity. I'm sure all of us can relate to this. If you're having a bad day or you're feeling upset, you put on a sad song, turn it all the way up in the car while you're driving home, and it helps you cope with your emotions and express yourself. Music sustains our well-being and is crucial in lifting morale. It's part of the healing process and helps with depressive illnesses. Another big concept we must understand is music in context, the potential for meaning. Music itself is subjective. It has no inherent meaning or emotional content. The meaning derived from music can be changed depending on the context in which it is played, performed, or listened to. Music's effect and the emotions attached to music are strongly linked to human experiences. The effect of music on the human body and emotion is dependent on the circumstances surrounding our perception. Now, normally, listening to and performing music as a method of expressing ourselves is a voluntary activity. You put music on in the shower, you put your headphones in after a bad day and chill out to some sad love ballads, all voluntary. However, listening to and performing music has also been involuntary. This brings me to music as torture and the role of music in Nazi concentration camps. The first type of musical torture I would like to introduce is forced singing and music on command. The method of forced singing was commonly used in Nazi concentration camps as a mental and physical force against inmates. It was used to intimidate, frighten, humiliate, or degrade prisoners. Forced singing actually derives from military tradition. Singing develops discipline, encourages marching rhythm, and symbolizes proper order. Inmates in the camps were forced to sing while performing harsh manual labor. They were forced to sing during and on their way to executions and beatings, and as you can imagine, this was dangerous and exhausting. Prisoners also had to watch out for how exactly they sang. Prisoners who sang too quietly or too loudly were beaten and mocked by the SS, which was the elite guard of the Nazis in the camps. This is a quote from a survivor who experienced forced singing in the camps. In the evening, we had to drag our dead and murdered comrades back into the camp, and we had to sing. Hour after hour, we had to sing, whether in the burning sun, freezing cold, or snow or rainstorms. Meanwhile, the dead and dying comrades lay next to us on a ripped up wool blanket or on the frozen ground. There was a deliberate choice of well-known songs that prisoners were forced to sing in the camps. The first one I would like to point out is Ave Maria. I'm sure some of us know this song, and this was a popular song at the time too. Prisoners connected Ave Maria with feelings of fear, overriding any previously held positive memories. It was also difficult for inmates to bear singing upbeat songs that might have once brought them joy. The abusive context in which they sang these songs impacted their experiences and emotions. Another song I would like to point out is Sachsenhausen-Lied. The lyrics in this song outline what life was like in the camps. They expressed a longing for freedom. The song was used as a weapon in demonstrating control and humiliating prisoners because the lyrics parodied their situation. Music from radio was another type of musical violence utilized in concentration camps. This came in the form of propaganda speeches, military marches, radio broadcasts accompanying Hitler's events, and German national music. They were all played over loudspeakers in the camps. By doing so, guards hoped to instill noble German values in the prisoners. Richard Wagner's anthems were played in the Dachau camp, which was Horst Wessel-Lied, a Nazi anthem. Music from radio also brought about sleep deprivation in the camps, drowned out mass murder, and elicited intense emotions of despair. If this music that was heard in the camps was played in a different context and location altogether, it may not have gained the same response. When the first sounds came from the speakers, we were sure that the modest amount of rest and quiet normally brought by the evening was gone forever. Great Mother Germania sat invisibly by the beds of even her most depraved sons, singing them to sleep. Camp orchestras were common among concentration camps during this time. Their main purpose was to accompany torture and facilitate the synchronization of steps and the counting of inmates during their departure from the camp to go work for the day. Again, the rhythm provided control, and orchestra members actually had a better chance of survival because they were needed. For orchestra musicians, playing in this orchestra was an experience of violence. They played songs for workers and newly arrived prisoners, and they played during the selection process, which brought a false sense of comfort to new prisoners and evoked a strong feeling of guilt in the orchestra members. The violence experienced by the orchestra musicians and the sense of hope experienced by new prisoners from listening to the orchestra really shows the ambiguity inherent in music. Here are some quotes about camp orchestras from Holocaust survivors. We knew that all the people who streamed out of the wagons were going to the gas chambers, and we had to play pleasant music for them. Many newly arrived prisoners listened eagerly to the music. It gave them courage that the camp could not be too terrible if they were being greeted by music. These quotes are very telling of how we assume music to be such an encouraging and positive power. The prisoners newly arriving felt comforted, but they were deceived and feeling the opposite of what they should have been feeling. Some notable repertoire in camp orchestras are famous marches, light music, dance music, and classical music. The first piece of music I would like to point out is Komm zurück. This was a love song that accompanied prisoners to their executions. It said, "Come back to me." And in singing this, it evoked a sense of shame in prisoners. Another piece of repertoire I would like to point out is the Internationale. Communist inmates dug their grave while singing the socialist anthem, and this stripped them of their identity. And finally, Judenlied, which means Jew song. This was an anti-Semitic anthem that only Jews were forced to listen to and sing. Finally, songs originated in the camps were another use of musical torture. Detainees compose original works as a form of hope and survival, and to preserve their self-respect. Some songs were composed as punishments, such as Fahyad. When Shaul at the Sobibor camp refused to beat other prisoners, he was ordered to compose a song praising the living conditions. It stated, "Our life is happy there. We receive food. How happy it is in the green forest where I stay." However, it is said that Fahyad could be disguised as an expletive to hide its real meaning from German guards. As much as this was a punishment, this little piece of information could potentially bring some self-respect back to the prisoners. Another song composed in the camps was Dacha Lied. This was an ironic response to the camp's motto, Arbeit macht frei, work makes freedom. Arbeit macht frei is a famous camp motto seen at the beginning of many camps. Just like the songs we've been talking about, it was mocking. The inmates in the camps were forced to be slave laborers, and they were forced to live under this motto of freedom. An important thing to remember at this time is no matter what music was produced in Nazi camps, whether it was uplifting or a result of torture, it was produced in spite of psychological and physical violence, constant hunger, impending disease, an uncertain future, and random acts of terror. To close, I would like to bring us all back to the listening exercise we did at the beginning of this presentation. This is actually a musical collage of music that was used as torture in concentration camps and includes a lot of the musical pieces we have been talking about today. I'm closing by repeating the same musical example from the beginning, because now we've put this music in context and talked about it, I wonder if you will hear it differently now.
Wir schreiten fest in gleichem Schritt, wir trotzen Not und Sorgen, denn in uns zieht die Hoffnung mit auf Freiheit und das Morgen. Schenk Roten ein, schenk Weißen ein, so will ich das Lied euch singen. Jeder Farbe, welcher lebt ein Licht am Stirn. Ja, weit ist der Weg zurück ins Heimatland, so weit, so weit.
Es rettet uns kein höheres Wesen, kein Gott, kein Kaiser, noch Tribun.
Weil ich dich liebe, glaub ich an dich. Doch willst das Schicksal, vergisst du mich. Das darf nicht sein, tausendmal nein. Komm zurück.
Und die Arbeit, die wir machen, diese Arbeit, die wird gut, denn wir haben die Losung von Dachau gelernt und wurden stahlhart dabei. Sei ein Mann, Kamerad, bleib ein Mensch, Kamerad, mach ganze Arbeit, fang an, Kamerad, denn Arbeit macht frei.
The bigger picture. Despite the fact that we commonly think of music as uplifting and freeing, it has also been used as a means of torture. By understanding the ways in which music was transformed into a weapon, we as musicians and active members of culture can work to produce and consume music that helps us express strong emotions. As we've discussed, music is context dependent. The listening exercise that we just repeated is a great example of music in context. Music is subjective. If you're anything like me, listening to that exercise for the first time, you thought the songs were upbeat. But when we put it into context of how those songs were actually used, it held a different meaning for me, and I hope for you all as well. Now, music and context is a very big topic and a very big discussion to have. So to close, I've included some modern day connections to help the relationship between music and context maybe become a little bit clearer. The first modern day event I would like to talk about is 9/11. The songs Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel and Imagine by John Lennon were songs that were connected to this event to help people cope. These songs existed prior to the event, but held a brand new meaning when associated with the event. There was also the 2017 Manchester Arena bombing at an Ariana Grande concert and the benefit show that followed. Songs such as Love's in Need of Love Today and Break Free existed before this tragic event, but were performed at the benefit concert. These songs took on new meanings and elicited a different emotion than one may have had if they listened to the songs prior to the event. These two events really show the power of music. In this case, music was used to mirror emotions and help people recover. That is the inverse of music that's used as torture and music that contradicts our emotions. In conclusion, the two greatest takeaways from this presentation is how we usually think of music as uplifting and mirroring our emotions. Sometimes it does the opposite, and sometimes it is used to harm. Music experienced as pleasure can also be experienced as pain. We can also experience the same piece of music differently depending on the context and memories it evokes. Continuing to have conversations about the events of the Holocaust, as well as continuing to listen to music from survivors that came out of the camps and making music ourselves, is an important way of educating and encouraging the public to acknowledge this history of sonic torture. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope this gave you all a better understanding of the role of music in concentration camps and in our culture today. You can find my full essay on this topic on the Northeastern Jewish Studies website. I've also included my email and social media if you have any questions and would like to reach out. This has been such an honor. Thank you all again.
Thank you so much, Kalah, for that wonderful presentation. Kalah did a wonderful job really bringing to light the importance of the context of music and the use of music as an instrument of torture, not only as something that can be uplifting, the emotional resonance of music, both during the Holocaust and after. And I hope I'm sure there are many questions, and I hope you can save them until after Professor Jacobson's presentation, and then we will take them all together and have a discussion. So I just want to introduce Professor Joshua Jacobson, who's Professor Emeritus of Music and was Director of Choral Activities at Northeastern University for 45 years. He was holder of the Bernard Stotsky Professorship of Jewish Cultural Studies. He was also founder, and is also the founder of the Zamir Chorale of Boston, which is a musical ensemble specializing in Hebrew music that has traveled around the world and is world-renowned. And Professor Jacobson is world-renowned as both a scholar and a conductor. He has been devoted to both public scholarship and to public service. He launched the Middle Eastern Harmonies in 2011, a project that brings Arab and Jewish musicians together on stage. He's published in many journals and publications, and also is the author of Chanting the Bible, The Art of Cantillation, which was a book that was a finalist for the National Jewish Book Awards. So this is a person who we're just delighted is able to join us and give his own thoughts on the topic because, as Professor Lefkowitz said, he's somebody who has been so central to the Gideon Klein Award, so central to these presentations and this aspect of our Holocaust awareness programming, and has been a mentor for many students at Northeastern, both in Jewish studies and in music for decades. And so we are delighted to hear from Professor Jacobson, and very thankful for the presentation he's put together for us. And like I said, after we will have a discussion about both presentations. Audio. Maybe we'll start that from the beginning. Can we start that from the beginning with the audio?
Thank you, Professor Rabinovich, for inviting me back to campus, at least virtually. And congratulations to Kalah Karloff on your presentation, We Made Music in Hell. I recently retired after 45 years teaching and making music at Northeastern University. From 1992 to 1998, I served as the first Stotsky Professor of Jewish Historical and Cultural Studies at Northeastern. And during that time, we initiated a fledgling Jewish Studies program, which has blossomed in recent years under the leadership of Professor Lefkowitz. The donor, Dr. Bernard Stotsky, had stipulated that the honoree would do work in the area of Holocaust studies. My proposal was to work in the area of how music was used in the Holocaust. My focus was primarily on how music served as a coping mechanism for Jewish concentration camp inmates, as a means of maintaining their humanity, and as a vehicle of expression and protest. In December of 1992, we produced a concert from Out of the Depths with the Northeastern University Chorus and the Zamir Chorale of Boston. Our next project was related to the music making in the Terezin concentration camp. First, a little bit about Terezin. In 1941, the Nazis evacuated the ancient walled city of Terezin, or Theresienstadt as it was called in German, and transformed it into a huge transit camp. 58,000 people at a time were crowded into a walled town that could support no more than 7,000. The old walled city provided a convenient holding pen for the Jews of Bohemia and Moravia until they could be shipped to the death camps in the east. Of the 140,000 men, women, and children who were sent to Terezin between 1941 and 1945, only 11,000 survived. The rest either perished from malnutrition and disease in the ghetto or were sent to the death camps in Poland. In 1942, the Germans decided to use Terezin as a model camp, a facade to hide the truth of the extermination of European Jewry. The Nazis allowed the inmates to organize cultural activities and produce concerts. One of the prisoners in the Terezin camp was Gideon Klein. This handsome pianist and composer was murdered in the Fürstengrube death camp at the age of 26. I was able to travel to Prague and Terezin and interview several survivors of the camp. Here I am with Klein's sister, Eliška Kleinova. Let's listen to a short song composed by Gideon Klein, December 3rd, 1942, for one of the choirs in Terezin, Bachuri La'an Tisa. In the Hebrew lyrics, a girl is asking her boyfriend where he is going. He responds, "It's all over." Perhaps he is about to be transported to a death camp. In November of 1994, we hosted an international symposium on the music of Terezin. November 19th, we presented the official premiere of a satirical opera composed in Terezin, The Emperor of Atlantis. The next day, we presented a panel featuring survivors, scholars, and musicians, and that evening, a concert of music from Terezin and the other camps. My second project dealt with a Jewish requiem for chorus that was created in the Sachsenhausen concentration camp.
Martin Rosenberg was a Polish choral conductor who had made quite a reputation for himself before the war. But because he was a Jew and a socialist, he was taken by the SS to the Sachsenhausen concentration camp. What does a choral conductor do? Even in a concentration camp, he forms a choir. He recruits a choir. He found a couple of dozen inmates that were willing to sing in secret after long days of backbreaking labor. When they found that they were going to be shipped off to the death camp at Auschwitz, Rosenberg wrote a special requiem, death song, for himself and his prisoners, based on an old Yiddish folk song called Zehn Brüder.
In 1997, Northeastern University chemistry professor Bill Geeson came to me with an idea. Inspired by the story of the Terezin composer, Bill established the Gideon Klein Award to enable a student to study the work of musicians and other artists who were persecuted by the Nazis. The award was established in memory of Bill's mother, Gustel Korman Geeson. Bill Giesen was not Jewish. Born in 1932, he grew up in Germany and came to America to complete his college education and stayed here. Bill told me about his shock when he learned how many Jews were lacking a sophisticated knowledge of their own history and culture. The Gideon Klein Award is just one of many programs in Jewish studies that were supported and initiated by Bill. Our first awardee of the Gideon Klein Award was Virgil Bozeman, who presented his research in a program in March 1998 called Forbidden Music, Censored by the Nazis. Ms. Karloff's program focuses on another aspect of music as an instrument of torture. As Ms. Karloff points out, the Nazis used music as a weapon against their captives. But the captives were also able to use music as a weapon against their captors, writing and singing songs of defiance, creating secret, satirical cabarets, and organizing clandestine choirs. Thanks to the work of Kalah, Karloff, and other students, the Northeastern University Jewish Studies Program and the Gideon Klein Scholarship, we continue to learn the lessons of the past and perhaps even recognize the dangers of today.
Thank you so much, Professor Jacobson, for that wonderful presentation, which was both a retrospective of Professor Jacobson's very important work at Northeastern University in the program of Jewish Studies and advising students in both music and in Jewish Studies here at Northeastern, as well as his work as a conductor and as somebody bringing music to life from this period. And one of the really wonderful things that I take from Professor Jacobson's presentation is that music also has an important role to play simply as an outlet for human emotion. And sometimes it's neither resistance nor torture, but just something that some humans simply must do as a way of expressing themselves, which I think ties in very nicely to Kalah Karloff's presentation. And also hearing this retrospective and seeing Kalah's work gives me great hope for the future of our Northeastern students engaging in this kind of scholarship and this kind of work and interest in music and the Holocaust. So with that, I'm going to open up the floor to discussion and comments for those who might have. And I'll give it a minute, but if not, I will take the chair's prerogative and ask the first question. Professor Jacobson.
Simon, thank you. First of all, congratulations to Kalah, and my apologies for pronouncing your name wrong throughout my presentation. I thought it was Kalah, which is also a nice name. So you brought up some, what I think is a very important aspect of music, and that is association. There are certain universals in music. Music, the tempo, the speed of music, the dynamics, the loudness of music, the combination of notes, consonants, and dissonance. These are things that are universal. And in fact, at the music college, did an experiment with a tribe, I believe it was someplace in inner Africa, people who had never heard Western music before, played them various pieces and asked them to say whether they thought it was angry music or happy music or sad music. And even though these people didn't know this culture of music, most of them made that same association that people in the West did. But for the most part, Music is not universal, right? There are cultural associations with music. And in my work with Jewish music, one of the most famous ones is this melody. Which for many Jews, Zionists, would associate with the Zionist anthem, which became the Israeli national anthem. But if you were in Moldavia, you would say, oh, that's Karol Kubo. That is a farmer's folk song. So as you pointed out very well, depending on the context, we can have different associations with music. So there are cultural associations. There are personal associations too. You know, I can listen to a particular song that can remind me of a girlfriend I had back in 1969 or, you know, or whatever. That's a very personal association. So what I'm getting at is another association here, and that is the music of Wagner. You spoke of the 19th century German, mostly opera composer. He wrote an anti-Semitic tract in 1860. But aside from that, his music was used by the Nazi government as emblematic of the greatness of German culture, of Aryan culture. And because of that association, many Jews who survived the Holocaust cannot stand to listen to the music of Wagner. They don't even know that he was an anti-Semite or what he wrote. It was just the association of that music. And for that reason, in Israel, it has been the custom not to play Wagner's music for many, many decades, just out of consideration for the feelings of the survivors, because of that very strong association of, as you point out, music in the Holocaust. Just one other thing, and I don't want to take up the whole time of the Q&A. Some of you of a certain age group might remember a TV show, I think it was in the late 1970s, it was called Holocaust. And it was really the first time that that word gained major use, and it was the first time, I think, that the Holocaust had been presented on a national level, on network television. And I so strongly remember one of the scenes in that movie, and that was one of the guards in the concentration camp, after a busy day of selection and murder, went back to his room, his office in the concentration camp, because they weren't allowed, they didn't usually get to leave, and he put on a recording of Beethoven's symphony. And he's sitting there listening to the Beethoven symphony and getting so much enjoyment out of it. And I remember at this fairly new teaching at Northeastern, and I just had this idea that listening to great music, listening to classical music, listening to Beethoven's music was uplifting. It made you a better human being. And here was this person who was hardly a better human being listening to the same music.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, yeah, to go along with your point, I know there's definitely songs that I like associate certain memories or emotions to, like, oh, like whenever this song comes on, it reminds me of like my junior prom. So it's like, it's definitely easy to kind of imagine how people affected in the camps can definitely hold on to this music and how it's changed for them forever, essentially.
That's a wonderful a wonderful analysis of the connection, and a way of sort of launching this dialogue, Professor Jacobson. Thank you very much. And I think it's really an interesting way that these two presentations work very well together, because they both discuss the emotional context and the way that music can evoke different emotions in different people depending on the context. So I really appreciate that. I just want to turn to to turn to Ayoiko Abe, who has a couple of questions in the audience. And the first one is for Kalah, who asked the really excellent question of whether people can recover from sonic torture. Is this something that you perceive can be reversed if people develop these associations?
Yeah, that's a great question. I did focus kind of minimally on music, like music therapy and using music to heal, because that's like such a huge topic in its own. So that's a really good question, and definitely like a really good prompt for like branching off research onto this. But honestly, I think music is so powerful that if we kind of restructure, like if we connect this song to a happier event, that people could be able to love the song again or start to associate it with something else. I don't know if their experience in the camp would be just so heavy that they wouldn't be able to do it, but I believe that music would have the power to help create new experiences. So yeah, I definitely think so.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, I guess the question it's a question of how plastic our minds are, right? And the degree to which some imprints are maybe too significant to reverse, and maybe it depends on the individual. It's a wonderful question. Professor Jacobson, Mr. Abe also has a question for you, an excellent question about how we know about this music. How did it survive, and the modes of its physical survival to be passed on to people, to the next generations and the living.
Sure, it's a great question. I will try to answer it, as we say, while standing on one foot. Some of these songs were in the oral tradition. They were passed on from one person to the next, and from one concentration camp to the next. The famous partisan song is a great example of that. And they were not written down until after the war. There was one survivor, he was a musician himself, who after the war, he went around to the camps where the survivors were, right, the DP camps, and he asked people to sing songs they sang during the Holocaust. He wrote them down in musical notation, later published them. So that's one way we know about these. Some songs were smuggled out. When I interviewed, I showed the picture of my interviewing Eliška Kleinova, one of the survivors of Terezin. And again, thanks to Northeastern for sponsoring my trip to Prague so that I could interview her. She said that there were that some of the sheet music was smuggled out with people who were going in and out. And some of it wasn't discovered until many years after the Holocaust ended. A good example of that is the opera that was composed in Terezin, The Emperor of Atlantis, which was a satirical opera making fun of the Nazis and specifically of Hitler, written by Victor Ullmann. And the rehearsals went on, but then the Nazi guards watched the dress rehearsal and they finally got it. And they realized that this was subversive material. They forbade the production of the performance of the opera, and all the main characters, the composer, the librettist, etc., were sent off to Auschwitz to be killed. So how did this one survive? Fragments of it were hidden, and some of these things were even buried underground and discovered after the war. Some of it was remembered by one of the main singers in it who write it down. And eventually people were able to piece together from these fragments. It's kind of like the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? We have all these fragments, and eventually they were able to piece together the score of the opera. And as I mentioned, we were able to give the premier official performance of the opera as part of our symposium performance that we did here at Northeastern. So it's a great question. A lot of different answers to that.
It's a great question and a fascinating answer, especially I think attesting to the position that both of you take in your presentations about the sort of compelling necessity of expression through music, that that these individuals would go to great personal risk. I mean, they were, I suppose, already at considerable risk, but that this was something that they felt compelled to find a way to share, especially at a time when, as Kalah mentioned, or really was the center of her studies, that these things could work complementarily, right? That music was being used as an instrument of torture at the same time as people were seeking to create it.
Can I just add a little
Please.
postscript to that? The song that you saw the video of in my presentation that was written in the other concentration camp. My mind is not working. It survived because one of the non-Jewish political prisoners who was in the camp witnessed the rehearsals of this choir singing this song, and then eventually he was able to, after the war, remember this song and write it down. And again, part of the research, I was able to contact the U.S. Holocaust Museum and was able to get his diary, this Polish prisoner who had written this, and we got it translated, and we reproduced the whole story of how this was written, as well as the music itself. So, again, there are no simple answers, and the songs that we don't have are the ones that didn't survive. So the only ones that we have are miraculous, because somehow they did survive.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point, that we don't actually know the extent of production, and think of all these many other camps where the survival rate was even lower, and nearly everyone who passed through died. We can't even know what might have been produced. It's really an excellent.
Sachsenhausen is the name I couldn't think of a minute ago, the Sachsenhausen camp.
Professor Lefkowitz?
This is such an interesting conversation, and it occurs to me that that the subversive capacity of inmates to make music when they were deprived of agency is actually the flip side of using music to deprive the inmates of their humanity, that it's about who has control over your relationship to your own, to the conditions of your life and to your own subjectivity. So that if you, that what the Nazis managed to do is deprive people of their humanity by imposing music that was unwelcome, and the response of prisoners in choosing to create music when they weren't permitted to was to assert their humanity. And so in some ways it's the same process, only flipped. It's about who has control.
Yeah, that's a great point, like especially with what I was talking about with the song Fahyad. It was like given to prisoners as a punishment, but the word Fahyad actually is like a disguised expletive and like the prisoner's way of kind of fighting back and trying to keep like preserving their self-respect and their like have some sense of control. So yeah, that's a really great point.
And in the ghetto of Vilna, also known as Vilnius, there was a weekly culture group that met, and their motto was that the Nazis can control our bodies, but they cannot control our spirit. Laurie, that's exactly what you were saying.
Yes, no, that's a wonderful point. I just have a question here from Professor Marty Blatt, who's a member of our committee and has long served on the Holocaust Awareness and the Holocaust and Genocide Awareness Committee, and is the former director of public history at Northeastern University. And he's just wondering if either Professor Jacobson or Kalah, you could comment on prisoners singing Jewish prayers and the sort of level of courage, and I suppose subversion as well, required to do that.
Yeah, I mean, it's well known that Jews would pray, some Jews would pray in secret. In Terezin, there was a secret synagogue room hidden behind a bakery. We were able to visit that actually when we went there. And then there are prayers written on the walls. And look, we also know that for many people, religion was something that kept them alive. That was the candle that kept lit. And they would do whatever they could to pray. But for others, they no longer believed in prayer. They no longer believed in God. They felt that they had been abandoned by God, and they lost their religion. So in terms of the music of these prayers, there's not much that we know. I mean, there were famous cantors who were, I think it was Leib Glantz, who was imprisoned in Auschwitz and met his death there, but know much about specific. Well, there's the one melody for the 13 Principles of Faith called Ani Ma'amin. That was supposedly, we don't have verification of this, but it was supposedly written by a religious Jew, a Chosid, who was on a train being deported to one of the camps. And in the train, it was said that he wrote this song of faith. And that's the only instance that I directly know of.
You know, Josh, I was also thinking about Ani Ma'amin when Marty asked his question, because the lyric to Ani Ma'amin is, I believe with perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah, even though the Messiah may delay, I still believe. And I grew up having learned that was sung as people marched to the gas chambers. Now, again, I don't know if that's urban legend or truth, but to Kalah's point about context, to just hear that lyric, I believe in perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah, it's one thing. To hear that was a conviction sung at the very moment when one would be least likely to have perfect faith in the coming of the Messiah transforms that melody into, I don't know, irony, something quite different from the serenity of perfect faith. Or maybe it's serenity in the face of the least, I mean, maybe that is what perfect faith is.
Yeah, that reminds me too of how, the guards made the inmates sing like for ironic purposes and to kind of get entertainment out of it. And the guards would be entertained and thinking it's comical. So yeah, that reminded me of that. Again, that's control, about how they did this for their own entertainment and watching people suffer under their control.
And it's a common tool of oppression, Kalah. I'm thinking now of, how slave populations were made to dance and at the same time created music as a form of defiance.
Yeah.
I would add also, in terms of the context and the significance of the context, to the point about whether, let's say, a melody, a prayer like Ani Ma'amin, whether that was truly sung by people on their way to the death camps, or was simply passed on and believed to be such by survivors, doesn't actually affect the way the emotional registration that people get out of it in subsequent generations when they hear it, if that association is there, right? But like Professor Jacobson's point about Wagner, but okay, Wagner was an anti-Semite, but his own personal views are less relevant than people sort of, the way they perceive the connection to be.
One other thing I'd like to bring out to Marty's question and talk about irony. In the Terezin camp, the Jews formed a choir and sang Verdi's. They rehearsed and performed it 4 times. The Jews sang this Catholic music written for funerals.
Sorry to interrupt you, Josh. Could you say that again? Which Verdi? I think you just broke up just at the moment.
Requiem.
Requiem, I'm sorry.
The Requiem by Giuseppe Verdi. Right? And by doing so, they focused on the section in the Dies Irae movement, which was punishment for the doers of evil. So they were able to take that and use the meaning of that, as we say in Yiddish, as a shtuch to get back at their captors.
That's really interesting. So I'll ask my question is to both of you, Professor Jacobson and Kalah, about the educational value of studying music, both that has come out of the Holocaust and that was used as an instrument of torture during the Holocaust, and also music that has been used to commemorate the Holocaust since. What are some of the ways that you see that music can be used and valued as an educational tool, besides in the context we're doing so right now, but to teach students, the public, young people, old people, everyone about the Holocaust?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I think it definitely just keeps this ongoing conversation about the Holocaust, which I think is really important. I mean, I feel less and less people are really becoming really educated on the Holocaust these days. So I think it's super important to keep having just conversations about the event. And in terms of music, it teaches us what kind of music we can make. As a songwriter, I can make music that touches on people's emotions and experiences. So it's really important to understand like how we can move and shape different people's experiences when we're creators ourselves, and kind of influencing people to keep creating music for positive power. As if you have the awareness that music can be used as violence, then you kind of have a better understanding of how to use it for good.
Continuing to create music and commemoratively is important as well, which is really interesting. And Professor Jacobson, I mean, your career has spanned decades using music in the ways that I just mentioned. But I thought, anyway, you might have some feeling about the future of how we could use music.
Sure. Let me take you to the past first. When I first got this professorship at Northeastern dealing with music and the Holocaust, I was concerned because what people were learning about Jews and Jewish culture, so much of it was focused on the Holocaust. And I wanted to focus instead on the amazing creations of Jews, for example, before the Holocaust that almost got wiped out. All right, but we were dealing with the Holocaust, and you may have heard the ironic expression, there's no business like Shoah business. People taking advantage of the Holocaust to make their careers, to make entertainment, to make shows, to make movies, to make music that would sell. And I had one interview with Elie Wiesel, and I asked him about that, and he said, no, don't step back from it. People need to know. You need to do whatever you can to teach people about the Holocaust. So yes, music, Simon, music opens a door, opens a window so that we can enter other cultures and other times, stand in other people's shoes, as it will, through music. And yes, I think we can continue to use music in that way.
Simon, just to your point, in past years, we have had Gideon Klein scholars who've taken some of the poetry written in the camps, in particular in Terezin and Theresienstadt, and set that poetry to music. And I'm also reminded of Cantor Davidson's having created a full repertoire from the Butterfly collection. That is, I Never Saw Another Butterfly was an sort of emblematic child's poem from that camp. But there was the children were encouraged to write poetry. Davidson set it to music, and then for the like some decade anniversary of the liberation of Terezin, the American Boy Choir learned that music, went to Theresienstadt and did a concert on site of Davidson's repertoire of the poetry written there. And for me, my sister filmed that. She was involved in the production that filmed the concert. She was in Prague for a number of weeks, and the video is readily available. It's called The Journey of Butterfly. But watching it, one of the things that struck me is you have these American, non-Jewish, blonde, sweet boys singing the words of the Jewish children who had been imprisoned on that location. And there's something very powerful actually about the disconnect, again, to Kalah's point about context being everything. But that disconnect in a positive way, actually, how the power of education to take these, children from the middle of America who had no, existential connection to this level of children's suffering, and educate them, bring them to the location, teach them the music, and then create a concert that is then preserved for all time. So I think the power of music and education is just, there are so many ways to look at that. And this scholarship has been one vehicle for the creation of educational music around the Holocaust.
Yeah, that's a wonderful point. And it makes me think, about its uses in solving one of the problems that I think all of us educators who teach about the history of the Holocaust in our classes face, which is how to teach it without focusing too much on the actual process of mass death, right? To focus, to put in, how do we both learn about it without all of our attention too much being on the process, thereby to a certain extent rewarding the murderers, right? I mean, who themselves were focused on this process, and this sort of looking at modes of subversion and resistance and preservation and culture and music from both angles, both the ways that it was manipulated by the murderers and the way it was used subversively by the victims, is a powerful way, not around this problem, but to help us with it. And if there are no more questions or comments, I'll just give the last one to Professor Blatt, who points out that his own mother, her own experience in the Holocaust caused her to abandon her faith or her connection to Judaism and to God, but she still preserved this love of Jewish prayer music, that there was this clearly an emotional resonance and a cultural connection that survived this experience, which I think is a wonderful way to end this program. And with that, I'll just say thank you again, really so much to Ms. Karloff and Professor Jacobson, Josh and Kalah for your wonderful presentations. Kalah, to all of your work all year. I mean, this is something to emphasize. This was a year-long project And like Kalah mentioned, the essay that this presentation is based on is preserved in our library catalog and on the Holocaust and Genocide Awareness Archives site. And so thank you for all your work and living up to the name Gideon Klein Scholar. We really appreciate it. And to Professor Jacobson for all your mentorship over the decades, and to Professor Lefkowitz for your specific mentorship of Kalah this year, but of course, previous scholars as well. Once again, I want to thank Gabby Fiorenza and Deborah Levison for all of their logistical work, for the committee for all the work planning, and to Dean Poiger and the Provost's office for their continued support, as well as the Northeastern Humanities Center, at the Program from Jewish Studies and the College of Social Sciences and Humanities. But before I let you go, of course, I have to remind you one more time about the two more incredible programs that we are having this week. On Wednesday at 7 o'clock, we are going to hear from Professor David Nierenberg, whose talk is called, "Does the Past History of Anti-Semitism Tell Us Anything About Its Future?" That's Wednesday, April 7th at 7 o'clock, and that's our 28th annual Robert Solomon Morton Lecture. And then the next day, Thursday, April 8th at noon, we will hear from Esther Adler, who will be giving the Philip N. Backstrom Holocaust Survivor Talk, and who will be telling us about her experience fleeing Nazi Germany after Kristallnacht and her experience living through the Holocaust from a distance in interwar Palestine, and how she had to observe what her perspective was of those events from afar. So two more really important and fascinating events, which I hope you will all join us for. And with that, I hope you have a nice week and good night.